So good morning. I want to welcome everybody to the Cornell Cooperative Extension Campus County Connection webinar on hemp in New York State. My name is Danielle Houtenemy. I'm stepping in for Celeste Carmichael, who was unable to join us this morning. And today we'll have a presentation from Dr. Larry Smart, who is leading up quite a bit of the efforts on hemp. And Dr. Smart, if I could turn the mic over to you so you can introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you very much, Danielle. I am a professor in the horticulture section of the School of Integrative Plant Science and the Geneva program leader. My lab and office are located on the Geneva campus. But I will be talking today about the work of pretty much our entire hemp team. And that includes, as you can see, folks from Don Viands' lab, Jaime, Crawford, Julie Hansen, Emilia, Yoffe. Chris Smart, who is our overall program leader in the hemp project. And I'll show you some very nice work from Gary Bergstrom's lab in plant pathology, Jaime Cummings and Kevin Myers working in his lab, and also Alan Taylor in horticulture and his technician Michael Loos have been working on seed science of hemp. So I just want to recognize them at the outset. So we're in a very interesting situation with hemp because although it was widely planted in the colonies in 1700, and in fact Thomas Jefferson is said to have even bred hemp varieties, we have not grown hemp for several decades. It boomed during World War II. There was, again, the colonies were a major hemp producer for sailcloth and rope for the sailing ships of the British Navy and British commercial fleet. But by the 1950s, hemp was replaced by synthetic fibers, so better living through chemistry there, and hemp farming declined. I suspect that it was more expensive and more complicated to produce and process hemp fiber for fabrics and ropes and things than synthetic fibers. And then in 1970, it was banned by the Controlled Substance Act and the war on drugs. It was treated like marijuana. So this is a good point to say that hemp, industrial hemp, is cannabis sativa. It is the same plant and species as marijuana, but there is a legal definition that was put into that Controlled Substance Act that plants which have a THC content lower than 0.3% can be classified as industrial hemp. But the live seed of hemp is considered a Schedule I controlled narcotic, even though it doesn't have the psychoactive compound THC. So we need to register and obtain a permit with DEA to handle live seed of industrial hemp. And everyone who works with the live seed is given a background check and is again registered with the DEA. In 2014, in the Farm Bill, language was inserted, and this was largely a push from senators in Kentucky and Colorado and I believe South Dakota, who inserted language saying that states could define pilot research programs state by state to allow research by universities and by the departments of agriculture in those states. So that is the language that we're working under now, and it can lead to a somewhat confusing and gray area between regulation by the states overlain by the federal regulation and still the status of industrial hemp as a Schedule I narcotic. So since that 2014 Farm Bill, there has really been an explosion of interest in hemp and hemp research. So in 2016, there were only 15 states. New York was one of those whose state legislature acted quite quickly to initiate a pilot research program. But now in 2017, we have at least 33 states, maybe a couple more. I think we might be up to 35 states now that have approved state hemp programs, pilot programs, although not all of those states are actively engaged in regulating industrial hemp. So it's quite interesting that the programs vary dramatically from state to state. For example, in Vermont, the Department of Agriculture has played no role in regulating industrial hemp. They have not registered hemp farmers, and essentially, my understanding is that hemp farming is at the risk of each individual farmer. Whereas in New York State, we have taken a very metered and measured approach, starting out with 10 licenses, and initially a lot of work done by universities. And then this past spring, they opened it up and issued an unlimited number of licenses. Most recently, they opened up the period again in November, and my understanding is they received license applications from another 70 farmers. So by my estimation, I think we have, if those licenses are approved, we may have as many as 100 industrial hemp farmers licensed in New York State, but we need to confirm that with Ag and Markets. The other interesting aspect here is that some of these states also have a legal recreational marijuana program. So then there is, again, sort of the interaction between industrial hemp growers and legal recreational marijuana growers that can further confuse things, particularly in the states of Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, and soon in the state of Maine. And I think also soon in Hawaii. So obviously recreational marijuana is not legal in New York State, but we do have an active medical marijuana program that is very highly regulated and very highly controlled. So in New York State, we do not face that situation. And we at Cornell, are not allowed to provide advice or extension on medical marijuana. It is federally illegal, and we should not be risking our status at Cornell University by advising on medical marijuana issues. So at least myself, I'm particularly careful about trying to make sure that I'm only dealing with folks who grow industrial hemp. So there are many market opportunities for hemp. So one of the reasons why Governor Cuomo and Ag and Markets are so interested in hemp is because we have some New York-based companies that are using hemp products imported from Canada or China to make consumer products. The biggest category, as you see here, would be for personal care. Soaps, lotions. We do have a soap producer that uses, I believe, tens of thousands of gallons of hemp oil in their products every year. There's a growing interest in hemp food products. The industry in Alberta and Saskatchewan, Canada, has really marketed dehulled hemp, which they call hemp hearts, and hemp milk, which you can find in Wegmans, as well as hemp oil. Hemp can be used, the woody core of the hemp stem, which we call the hurd, can be mixed with lime to produce what they call hempcrete, and that is growing. There's interest growing in building hempcrete houses and other hemp-based structures. When we look at the fiber side, you see consumer textiles there. There's a very complicated retting and processing line necessary to develop fabric quality textile hemp, which we only have one company in the US that has that processing ability. So most of those textiles are being made with fiber probably grown in China. And the final market is for cannabidiol, or CBD. So this is a compound that is biochemically related to THC and can interact with the cannabinoid receptors in our nervous system and in our brain, but has a very different effect. And there are clinical trials right now for CBD treatment of seizures in childhood epilepsy, and it seems to be having some medicinal benefits for that particular disease, epilepsy. There are also some anecdotal reports, I don't believe these are in clinical trials yet, for the relief of pain and chronic pain. So it's interesting because CBD has been marketed as a food supplement, a health supplement, but now that it is in clinical trials as a drug authorized by the FDA does not recognize it anymore as a health supplement or a food supplement, and in fact has issued warning letters to the major CBD companies that are marketing it as a health supplement. So that's another confusing gray area that we face right there, is because CBD is being researched as a drug, cannot be sold as a health supplement right now. At least that's what seems to be the case. So again, New York was a major hemp producer decades ago and in the previous century. So we would like to revive the hemp industry in New York State. This is our short-term strategy to do that, is to evaluate commercial hemp cultivars and identify those that are going to produce well in New York State, to identify interest among growers and also interest among processors. So there is a chicken and egg dilemma there, that growers need to have a market and processors need to have material. So I'll say that the state is trying to address that with funding that they have made available. $5 million of research funding on the hemp agronomy side, and Cornell has been fortunate to receive a portion of that money already. And they have also put up $5 million on the processing side to provide matching grants for companies interested in purchasing equipment for hemp processing. And I know they've already gotten 4 or 5 serious applications for that processing equipment grant money. We are working with Cornell Cooperative Extension to model the cost of production based on the numbers that we're getting this year, and have been active in trying to educate both growers and processors about hemp and hemp products. Now, one of the barriers to hemp production is there is again a gray area in the guidance from DEA, which states that one should not carry live seed across state lines. In fact, it's easier from their perspective, from the regulatory perspective, to import seed from Canada or Europe through a DEA authorized import permit than it is to carry seed across state lines. So if that holds up, so let me just say the countering argument to that is that there is language in the most recent Omnibus Appropriations Act which says that the federal government is not allowed to spend money to enforce that guidance. They are not allowed to interdict, to stop movement of hemp seed across state lines. So there are some growers who have no problem moving seed across state line, but again, New York State Ag and Markets and Cornell and some other seed producers are very wary about that DEA guidance about moving seed across state lines. So in that respect, we could provide a benefit to growers by having some local seed production and certified seed production. And our long-term goal at Cornell is to execute a hemp breeding program that will develop cultivars specific to New York State and seed grown here in New York State. So this is the team that we've assembled to work on hemp. Some of these people are spending more or less of their time on hemp, and all of them have other things that they're working on. But Chris Smart is very interested in looking at the hemp microbiome. Don Viands and I will be leading the breeding program. And again, I will show you some data from Gary Bergstrom's lab, who has been studying hemp diseases. Alan Taylor is working on seed aspects of hemp. Elson Shields' group has been out scouting for insect pests in our hemp trials. And to further diversify the hemp applications out there, Matt will be working on sustainable cropping systems, because hemp is of particular interest to organic growers as a rotation crop. Neil Madsen has got a lot of interest in greenhouse cultivation of hemp, some of it for CBD and some of it for hemp baby greens. I'll show you a picture of that. And then Joss Rose and Matthew Willman will be working on tissue culture and characterization of the biosynthetic pathway for THC and CBD. We've also assembled a team of cooperative extension specialists and educators who have been working on hemp, and I'll again highlight some of those in a slide later. So all told, including the people who are working in these labs, we have a team of more than 30 scientists, which is quite impressive on a national scale. We're making quite a splash nationally in our quick assembly of a very multidisciplinary hemp research and extension team. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we've been doing in Don Viands and my group initially to evaluate hemp cultivars in New York State. We're doing this in small plot trials with a small plot seeder. For the grain varieties, we seed at 25 pounds per acre. For the fiber varieties, we actually plant at a much higher density, 50 pounds per acre. And then we're harvesting the grain with an Almaco small plot combine so we can measure grain yield per plot. And we've been measuring establishment through stand density measurements, flowering date, and hemp is actually interesting flowering plant because it's dioecious. It has, each plant is either male or female, although some of the cultivars can be monoecious. They can produce both male and female flowers. And then measuring height through the season, surveying for pests and diseases, and our final yield and quality components. And we're just in the process of getting data back about the quality of our grain in terms of protein and oil content. So we tested 17 cultivars. These are commercially available cultivars from Canada or Europe. Some of them are classified as specifically producing grain. Some of them have been bred to produce both grain and fiber. We call those dual varieties. And actually in Europe, they may be harvesting, some growers are harvesting for triple purpose, grain, fiber, and CBD. So some of these also produce a reasonable amount of CBD. And then 4 fiber-specific varieties from Italy. So these have been bred in Poland, Italy, France, Serbia, and in Canada. So I'm just going to show you some photos of some of those plots, and perhaps some of you saw these at our Ithaca Field Day or Geneva Field Day. So this is what it looked like after 3 weeks. This is one of our better trials at the McGowan Farm in Ithaca, planted right on time and showing very good progress by the end of June. And again, pretty good height, about 5 to 6 feet tall after 7 weeks by the end of July when it's starting to flower. And then this was the Ithaca fiber trial at 73 days, which is the appropriate time just at the start of flowering there. You can see a lot of male flowers in that stand. And August 21st, we harvested those plots to measure the dry biomass of the fiber. And we did that with a sickle bar mower and then bundling up the stems, which were 8 or 9 feet tall at that point, and weighing the fresh weight and then taking a subsample to calculate the dry weight. And just to show you what we got in terms of fiber, again, this was planted June 9th, and in the Ithaca trial, we only planted the fiber varieties in 2 trials, one in Ithaca, one in Geneva. We got close to 5 dry tons per acre from Aleta Campagna, which is quite good. Actually, the fiber producer that I've talked to looks for a minimum of 3 dry tons per acre to be profitable. So getting close to 5 dry tons per acre is commercially quite viable there. Some of the seed lots had very low germination rate, and I think that is reflected in the Geneva trial, where we had very poor yield of the Carmagnola and the Carmagnola selecionata. But again, the Aleta Campagna seems to be the winner out of these 4 so far. And you see that our Geneva trial was planted in the end of June. It was very wet in Geneva, as it was through most of the state, and we were not able to get that trial site prepped until the end of June. So that also seriously impacted the yield potential of the fiber varieties in that trial. So this is a look at the grain trial at McGowan after 63 days to highlight the male flowers, which are starting to senesce at this point. You can see the brown shoots sticking up there. Those are the senescing male flowers. And this represents a grain variety bred in the plains of Canada in Saskatchewan. And they have taken an approach of breeding for shorter height plants, specifically for grain production. So they're a little bit easier to combine because of that shorter height. And they are strictly dioecious with male and female flowers. So you can see the sort of bunchy seed heads of the female flowers starting to develop there. Because the male flowers die off, then there is a distinct time when the female flowers are mature and the seed is ripe, and it's appropriate to harvest because there won't be any more pollen in the field. That's a contrast to the taller dual-purpose varieties, which you can see in the back there on that slide, which are growing, 3 to 4 feet taller, still producing good seed heads there, even though they're also dedicating some resources into height growth. But many of those are the monoecious varieties, so they will continue to produce pollen from the male flowers on those monoecious plants. So this is a picture of combined harvest at the McGowan trial in Ithaca. Again, you need to be able to raise the cutter head of the combine up to try to avoid cutting the stems and really concentrating on the grain heads there. But this combine worked fairly well for us and gave us good yields from our small plot trials. We then needed to go through and clean that seed. And so we planted on 6 sites, but on one of those 6 sites, we only had 1 replicate. So I didn't include those in the data here, but these are our mean yields by site. The East Ithaca site actually became quite weedy. We had fairly poor establishment on that site, and it became very weedy. And in the end, we decided not to fertilize that in mid-season, and the yields really suffered there. So an average of under 500 pounds of grain per acre on that site. The McGowan site in Ithaca was our best. We planted 2 different trials there, one on June 9th and one on June 29th. And again, the little bit shorter harvest time there probably resulted in a little bit lower yield. And again, in Geneva, our fields were quite wet. We weren't able to plant until July 10th on one site, June 28th on the other site. And that lower yielding Geneva site also probably suffered from poor drainage and poor fertility overall. But looking at the yields of around 1,500 to 1,600 pounds of grain per acre is, again, quite commercially viable. Those are very impressive yields. Typically, yields of 800 to 1,000 pounds per acre are seen as sort of the minimum. So yield of 1,600 pounds per acre, I think, is really quite commercially viable of clean grain. That's standardized to 8% moisture content in the grain. Looking at the 13 grain varieties that we tested, we do have some winners among the top 4. Those are all actually dual-purpose varieties. Belina, bred in France, Yellow Brzeski from Poland, Anka from Ontario, Canada, and Futura 75, I believe, was bred in France, I believe also. So those are the ones that we will probably focus on in the future. The CFX, CRS, Piccolo, CFX1 there, and Grandi, those are all grain-specific varieties from Saskatchewan, and I'm not sure that those are properly adapted to our latitude, but we will try them again next year and see how their yields hold up. But so far it's looking like the dual-purpose varieties bred in Central Europe are going to be the ones best adapted to our conditions in New York. Okay, so those were small plot trials that we executed on our Cornell farms. In June, we heard from the governor's office in Ag and Markets that they really wanted to make a bold splash and plant a lot of acres of hemp in New York State. So they asked us to organize a project to plant as much hemp as we could. We were able to get 51,000 pounds of seed from a hemp seed company in Ontario. One cultivar, Anka, which, as you just saw, was actually one of our better dual-purpose cultivars in our trials, so that worked out quite well. And in cooperation with Ag and Markets, we recruited 14 licensed companies who represented 24 farms. There were 2 aggregators included in that group. So we distributed seed to 24 different farms, which planted 1,700 acres across the state. We received the seed on July 10th and started distributing that. It was in those large 1-ton bags, as you see, or totes. Some of the seed we rebagged into smaller 50-pound bags, but a lot of it we were just distributing in bulk by truck. And some of it got planted right then on July 10th, but other growers, again, there was a lot of rain in late July, didn't get their seed planted until early August, which is obviously not ideal for a 90-day crop. So those growers were compensated from this grant process through Empire State Development. The terms of the project were that they would be paid $400 per acre, less the cost of seed, not to exceed $50. So because the cost of our seed was $60, actually, the farmers were paid $350 an acre, and we're actually making those payments right now. They were allowed to harvest and sell any of the grain or fiber that they could harvest from their fields, although in the end, very few of those fields produced harvestable grain. So the main purpose was to assess grower interest in hemp, to produce some material that we could then distribute to pilot processors, to look at establishment of hemp, and to learn some of the establishment techniques in terms of planters and field prep methods that are going to work best for hemp. And I think we've accomplished a lot of that. So here are the locations of those 24 farms, and the green dots are our Geneva and Ithaca campus locations. So you see we covered a fair representation of the latitudinal and longitudinal diversity across New York State, going from the Erie County, Cattaraugus County area through the Finger Lakes region, and had farms, 3 farms in Orange County and 2 farms in Columbia County. Unfortunately, we weren't able to recruit a farm on Long Island and no one in the North Country. But we hope to address that in 2018. And just some snapshots of contrasting fields. So on the left, a field in Erie County that was planted on July 21st. And yet, thanks to our warm September and early October, actually came very close to producing fully mature grain heads. Those plants were about 5 to 6 feet tall, but just not quite enough mature seed in the grain heads to justify combining that field. In contrast, a field in Orange County, and I see Mary Ulrich is on the call here, helped this farmer, Cavallero Farms, which had plants that grew 8 to 9 feet tall. Despite that late planting date, this was on high quality muck soil, typically used for onions, and just huge, 2 foot tall grain heads there with seed maturing, as you can see. Unfortunately, we could not find appropriate harvesting equipment to collect that grain, and there was really no market in that area. So those fields ended up being cut down and plowed in effectively. On the other side, this is a field in Cattaraugus County that was planted on July 31st. The tallest plants were only 2 feet tall. You can see it's definitely suffering from nutrient deficiency. The field was fairly poorly drained, so the plants never really took off, and that field was not a success, let's say. Very weedy, very poor growth, even though it had reasonable establishment of the hemp. You see a lot of hemp plants in there, but they just never really took off. So that highlighted to us that there are fairly strict field requirements for hemp. It does like well-drained, tilt loam soils, typically used for corn or soybeans. It does have a very high nutritional requirement. We're also learning that from Jen Gilbert Jenkins' research at Morrisville State College. So typically the Canadian grain producers will fertilize with 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre, and you continue to see increased yields if you grow up to 200 or even 250 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So it is a very nutrient demanding crop and requires high quality, well-drained soil. One of the issues with hemp, which Alan Taylor is hoping to address, is quite inconsistent and variable seed germination, and also relatively short seed storage lifetime. So that is his specialty. And also, I think we might be able to gain some benefit by applying some seed treatments. There are no pesticides that are labeled for hemp, and we do see some, as you'll see in the next slide, some seedling diseases like Pythium that can affect hemp. So I believe Alan is going to look at the potential for applying some organic seed treatments to try to improve seedling establishment, looking at trying to improve overall germination rates, and looking at, again, the cold tolerance for long-term storage conditions to try to improve overall seed quality. Now, I'm going to highlight a couple of the alternative uses of hemp here. from some of our growers in New York State, one of whom is very interested in producing hemp baby greens as a component of salad mixes, which is gaining a lot of popularity. Greenhouse grown in this case, but potentially also field grown in the future. But and then there are also growers who were growing high CBD cultivars, specifically for the production of cannabidiol. And these would often be started in the greenhouse, selected for the female plants, and then transplanted out and planted, for example, on, I believe this was 6x6 spacing with drip irrigation, but often you might even see 3 foot by 3 foot spacing. So a very different cultivation practice than for grain or fiber hemp. These would either be hand harvested or potentially could be harvested with a flower combine on a larger scale. So it's interesting because some of the disease issues that came up in 2017 were related to that greenhouse production and CBD production. So these are results from Gary Bergstrom's lab, and you can see they were able to isolate a number of different pathogens from hemp. Pythium, I'll go through and show you some pictures of these here. Sclerotinia was a known pathogen of hemp, can be quite devastating as it affects the stems. The stems lose integrity and the plants will snap off there. So this is Sclerotinia white mold. It was very prevalent across many locations and may be a problem in rotation with other legumes and dicots. It is a pathogen of beans, a known pathogen of beans, so this is definitely something Gary's lab will follow in the future and see how it's affecting other rotation crops. Chris Smart is very interested in oomycetes, the water molds. So Pythium is one of those organisms, and it caused severe problems in greenhouse production if the inoculum is present in the growth media or the watering systems. And again, we have no fungicides labeled for hemp, so this highlights the need for good sanitation in the greenhouses for hemp baby green production. We saw botrytis gray mold, very prevalent in many locations, and this could be a problem here affecting seed quality and processing because it's growing in those seed heads. And this is a good picture of one of the monoecious flower heads where you see the male flowers senescing there and providing a good growth habitat for the botrytis at the same time that female flowers are being pollinated and are starting to set seed. So that may actually turn out to be an issue with some of those monoecious varieties, and a good thing we need to research in the future. And then we also saw some Fusarium crown foot or root rot and wilt, which you can see was pretty devastating to the hemp plants. The final disease, which is quite interesting, was more prevalent in the high CBD strains that were not a part of our Cornell trials, but were being grown by some other producers in the state. Although they did find this disease on some non-CBD cultivars in Jefferson and Tompkins County. And this leaf spot disease, it turns out, is caused by a novel fungus, which was also found in Kentucky on some high CBD cultivars in Kentucky. And between Gary's group and the plant pathologist at University of Kentucky, they are trying to resolve the taxonomic description of this novel fungus causing leaf spot on hemp. So Gary is continuing to make collections of pathogen isolates that we can use in screening for future resistance breeding, and we'll be validating through Koch's postulates some of these diseases from their isolates by doing inoculations throughout the winter in the greenhouse. So I want to move on to our educational and extension programs. Again, we had a fantastic year with our cooperative extension team. There, Mike Hunter, Mike Stanyard, Jody Latham, Janice Degny, Mary Ulrich, all involved in our regional field crops extension teams. So these are pictures from our Geneva field day where we had about 100 people attending, a very good mix of growers, processors, and other interested people. We also had a field day down at the Geneva field trials with close to 100 people, maybe a little bit different mix, not so many growers down there. There's a picture on the lower left of Mary Ulrich with Chris Logue, our Director of Plant Industry for Ag and Markets, and myself gave a talk there at Cavallero Farms. We also, Tim Sweeney and I did an event in Columbia County organized by Cooperative Extension there. And there were a number of technical sessions that Ag and Markets put on across the state. So there was tremendous interest both by growers, processors, and the general public with some very entrepreneurial ideas about what they might want to do with hemp and questions about regulations surrounding hemp, the gray areas of the law. And Cheryl Thayer also produced a very nice document from Harvest New York, which is available on our website, talking about the hemp markets and some of the basics of producing hemp. Both Don Viands and I have done a number of interviews for TV stations and other print media, and we have a blog site up on our website. I hope we can actually improve on that website a little bit more in the near future, and we've had a presence on social media with a Twitter feed. So we hope to continue to be an educational resource and develop more materials. We will be at the New York Ag Society workshop at the New York Farm Show in Syracuse, but I think we're back. And I believe we will also have a workshop at the Expo in Syracuse, if I'm not mistaken. So we continue to try to get the word out about hemp in New York State. So in 2018, we will continue to do small plot trials. We just spoke with a breeder in Oregon who is going to send us about 13 cultivars from their program to add to about 20 cultivars, that, including the 13 that we already have. We've been talking with seed producers about getting certified seed production in New York State, but they're very wary about the law surrounding interstate seed transport. And then we're starting our breeding program using the germplasm we can secure from other breeding programs, trying to develop some molecular marker systems and do some genome sequencing, and also developing some high throughput phenotyping methods that should work well, especially for early seedling vigor and germination rates. So eventually, within, I'd say, 4 to 6 years, we would hope to release a certified low THC cultivar adapted to New York State conditions, and eventually we'll have some plant transformation and genome editing systems to be able to make specific modifications, in particular to the cannabinoid biosynthetic pathways. So that's a summary of the work that we've been doing. I only started working on hemp in April, so I'm really quite pleased that we've been able to assemble a very active and productive team in 2017 to be able to produce results like this in such a short amount of time. And again, we are the envy of many of the states out there because of our commitment from Governor Cuomo and the very prudent and careful regulation of the hemp industry by New York State Ag and Markets. And again, we've been working with money funded through Empire State Development Corporation with support also from Cornell Cals. So it's really been tremendous working with Cooperative Extension and with Ag and Markets. It's been a fantastic cooperation around the state, and I hope that will continue to expand and will support an expanding hemp industry.
Thank you so much, Larry. I'm now going to unmute all of our participants and just want to remind everybody to, if you are in an area where you may get some background noise, please mute yourself. I'm actually going to end up having to promote a lot of you to panelists to allow you to talk here. So beg your patience as I go through. We did lose connection for a moment, but I see that we are back up. Our recording did continue, so that should be fairly seamless. And I didn't see that we lost anyone during that little glitch. So do also feel free to type any questions into the chat area if you have something and I haven't gotten around to you yet to be able to unmute you. Okay. Do we have any questions? Give everybody a minute to either unmute themselves if they need to or to type something into the chat box. Okay, I'm not, oh, there we go. A question in from Jamila. Can you please repeat the issue with moving across the state border laws? Thank you. And Jamila, was that specific to seeds?
Yeah, it is an issue. So again, once the hemp is what they call devitalized, so if you have roasted the seed or if it is otherwise no longer considered live seed for planting, then there should be no problem transporting that across state lines. There may be some issues that, so you do often hear people say that you can only transport into a state that has a approved pilot research program. But again, our companies were importing hemp oil and okay, can you hear me again?
Yes, sorry, Larry, we lost you for a moment there.
Yep. So you do hear that it is only allowed to transport hemp products into a state that has a hemp pilot program. But again, if it is a hemp product like extracted oil or hemp hearts, that can be freely transported anywhere. Again, you can find it in Wegmans. So the real issue is with live seed for planting. And again, there is a guidance document that was issued by the DEA which indicates that one should not transport seed across state lines. But then that was countered by language in an appropriations bill passed by Congress, which said that the government could not expend funds to prevent the movement of seed across state lines. Of course, the risk of that is that, they're passing another appropriations bill here right now in the next couple of weeks, and if by some chance those two sentences are removed from the appropriations bill, then DEA would be freely open to spend money to prevent that seed transport.
Emilia, thank you so much for your question. We do have another question that's come in on chat. This is from Marie Ulrich. Can we have some official comments on the lack of THC in baby greens? Questions have arisen about consumers failing work year analysis should they eat these. Obviously, public education behind the science, but this might be something we need to help farmers with if it's going to be a market. Any comment on that, Larry?
Yeah, so we do hear this comment, and I have heard it actually talking to one of our larger processors in New York State about concern from athletes consuming hemp products like hemp hearts or purified hemp protein. So there is no THC in any of those products. So I think there's very little chance that athletes or people taking drug testing at work would fail. I need to do some research to see if there's any, peer-reviewed published research on that. We can certainly, now our analytical lab is coming up to speed on the Ithaca campus, and we have collected samples from many of our trial material across the state that we'll have analysis results here in the next few weeks. And then I agree, we need to have a public education campaign to dispel these rumors that circulate on the internet that you may fail a drug test, whether it's an athletic drug test or a work drug test, if you eat industrial hemp products, because there is no measurable THC in any of those tissues, whether it's baby greens or hemp hearts.
Thank you for your question, Marie. We have a question that's come in from Barb. She says, I am working with a company and farmer on CBD hemp. What are the main issues they need to know about? I've been helping them interpret soil test results.
Yeah, so I showed you that one of the main issues on the horticultural side is that these high CBD cultivars seem to be particularly susceptible to diseases. And specifically that novel leaf spot disease, which had not been described up till now. So that's a concern, again, because we don't have any labeled fungicides that we can use for disease management. And it may have to be a cultural practice to manage that disease. The other issue is a legal one. And again, I'm not the best person to advise on that, but because CBD specifically is in DEA-approved clinical trials for drug approval, the companies are not allowed to market it as a health supplement. And again, you can go to the FDA website. I'm sorry if I confused DEA and FDA. FDA-approved clinical trials are described on their website. These are being done by a large pharmaceutical company called GW Pharma, which has patented cannabidiol in a number of countries and is marketing a drug for childhood epilepsy, I think, in 20 countries around the world, and is trying to get approval for that in the United States. So if those results come through and the FDA approves that cannabidiol drug product as a drug, then it would not be allowed to be marketed as a vape product or in oil extracts that you can buy on the internet right now. So I think there is some risk there based on the patent and the clinical trials for CBD by GW Pharma. I will say that cannabidiol is part of the products. There is a mixture of CBD and THC among the products that are prescribed to patients in the medical marijuana program. So I think for many patients, they realize benefits from that essentially one-to-one mixture of cannabidiol and THC. But that's all prescribed by doctors through the medical marijuana program.
Thank you so much, Larry. I think we have enough time for an additional question. We're about 10:28. Does anybody have any further questions? Okay, not seeing anything else come in. Larry, I want to thank you so much for your time this morning, and the content that you provided, just fascinating. And I'm happy we'll be able to put this recording up and share it. So I know there are folks who will be interested in viewing it who were not able to participate. This is a really hot topic for us as an organization. I just want to thank all of our participants for joining us this morning, and hopefully we will see you on future Campus County Connection webinars. Thank you again, Larry.
Yep, thanks very much to everyone for joining in. Don't hesitate to contact me directly at lbs33@cornell.edu if you have any questions or would like to connect any of your growers with our researchers. So thanks again.
Excellent. Have a good morning, everyone.
You too. Thank you.
Yep, bye-bye.